4 centuries ago, humanity thrived in wealth and success. However, their hearts were tainted by lies and animosity, which led them to forge a catastrophic weapon known as the darkness. Its purpose was to put an end to all conflicts. But the darkness, having witnessed the true nature of mankind, chose to eradicate them instead, aiming to free the world from human corruption. As humanity faced near extinction, a towering beam of light split the skies, revealing a humanoid dragon wielding a mighty sword. These two beings recognized each other as fated adversaries, destined to clash until one prevailed. Their fierce battle shook the earth, sinking entire continents and leaving a trail of unimaginable devastation. Ultimately, the dragon emerged victorious, and the tale faded into legend, its truth lost in the mists of time. 400 years later, a kingdom found itself besieged by a wicked sorcerer and his monstrous army. The kingdom's soldiers fought bravely to protect their princess. Among them were Yoko, the daughter of the high priest, and Lukai, a shy young man. In the past, Yoko's father had taught her a powerful spell that could summon the spirit of the legendary black sorcerer into Lukai's body. However, the spell could only be activated by a kiss from a virgin, which is why her father forbade her from marrying. Lukai's perceived weakness made him the target of ridicule among the other soldiers. But due to Yoko's status, they tolerated his presence. Yoko hoped Lukai would become stronger, but he struggled with every effort. In the midst of the battle, the princess approached Yoko, urging her to unleash the black sorcerer's power. Yet Yoko hesitated, fearing the kiss required to break the seal. Suddenly, the sorcerer and his monstrous minions breached the defenses. 3 high-ranking officials revealed themselves as traitors, choosing to save themselves rather than remain loyal. Their betrayal was swiftly punished, as they were crushed by towering monsters. As the chaos unfolded, 2 massive creatures rampaged through the army, and Lukai was hurt while shielding Yoko. With no other option, Yoko cast aside her reluctance and kissed Lukai, successfully breaking the seal. Lukai awakened, now housing a second personality, the ancient sorcerer Schneider. Angry at being sealed in a child's body by Yoko's father, Schneider unleashed his rage, obliterating the 2 giant monsters with a single attack. Despite his rebirth, Schneider still identified as Lukai, Yoko's friend. News of Lukai becoming the vessel of the dreaded sorcerer Schneider spread quickly through the kingdom. Schneider was notorious for instigating the Golem War 15 years prior. Back then, he had been defeated by 5 great heroes, but not before using forbidden magic to ensure his reincarnation. The kingdom's people begged for Schneider's aid, but he was indifferent. He owed Yoko, not them. Despite his new strength and arrogance, he couldn't disobey Yoko. She demanded that he help those in need, and he grudgingly agreed. The sorcerer, a devoted follower of Schneider, refused to believe that the man before him was the real Schneider and dismissed him as an imposter. Commanding his forces to attack, he watched in shock as they were wiped out with a mere gesture from Schneider. Infuriated, the sorcerer unleashed a powerful lightning strike upon Schneider, leaving him seemingly burned and motionless. Undeterred, the sorcerer approached and struck Schneider's head repeatedly. However, the charred exterior cracked and fell away, revealing that the attack had merely scratched Schneider's face. Enraged, Schneider summoned the flames of the underworld upon the sorcerer. The sorcerer begged for mercy, but it was too late. The spell was cast, and he was reduced to ashes. The princess expressed her gratitude to Schneider, but he ignored her, turning instead to Yoko. He asked her a simple question before vanishing. Yoko pursued Schneider, desperate to learn his next move. Schneider then revealed his plans. First, he would seek revenge on her father for sealing him away. Next, he would wage war to conquer the world, destroying anyone who opposed him, sparing only Yoko as he had promised. Despite knowing Schneider's demonic nature, Yoko found herself developing feelings for him. Sensing her turmoil, Schneider leaned in and kissed her. In that instant, his demeanor softened, and Schneider reverted back to Lukai. Yoko began to suspect that her kiss might be the only way to seal Schneider back into Lukai's body. Meanwhile, the sorcerer's followers received grim news. Their master had been slain by high-level fire magic, a feat only one person could achieve. They sent a spy to uncover the identity of the one who defeated their leader. That night, Yoko was haunted by dreams of Schneider breaking free, murdering her father, and leading an army of monsters to conquer the world. She woke with a start, only to find Lukai had snuck into her bed, quietly cuddling her. Unbeknownst to them, a monstrous Hydra was moving toward the kingdom. The next morning, during breakfast, Yoko spotted a strange dark cloud looming on the horizon. Her father arrived, explaining that he was needed at the castle and warned that, in the worst-case scenario, they might need to awaken him again. At the palace, a messenger delivered troubling news. A neighboring kingdom had fallen to a swarm of sorcerers and beasts, now heading toward their own borders. As tensions rose, The high priest arrived with Yoko. The princess thanked Lukai for his earlier help, but Yoko, knowing that Lukai had no memory of his time as Schneider, advised against pushing the issue. The high priest suspected the enemy was preparing to revive the ancient darkness. Suddenly, soldiers rushed in, announcing that a Hydra was attacking the city. These creatures typically roamed the wilds, so its presence in human lands meant someone was controlling it. Panic swept through the palace. The officials, whose magic focused on healing and support, lacked the power to combat such a beast. Everyone turned to Yoko, urging her to bring Schneider back. Despite her embarrassment at the thought of kissing Lukai in front of everyone, the chaos and her father's insistence left her no choice. With reluctance, she asked Lukai to close his eyes, leaned in, and kissed him, awakening Schneider. As Schneider regained consciousness, the officials bombarded him with orders, assuming he would obey. But Schneider, arrogant as ever, dismissed their commands. His only goal was to conquer the world. Ori summoned a wall of fire to push the officials back and guided the king and princess to safety, claiming his debt to Yoko was now settled. He then declared his intent to kill Yoko's father, one of the 5 heroes who had imprisoned him, as the first step in his conquest. However, a flicker of fear, a remnant of his bond with Yoko, kept him from fully turning against her. Schneider summoned a bolt of lightning, aiming it at the high priest. In response, the old man raised a holy barrier, blocking Schneider's attack. However, this barrier also sealed away the priest's own magic abilities. Unfazed, the high priest used a different strategy. Cutting his own palm, he used his blood to activate a hidden seal, releasing a golem buried deep under the palace. The massive golem burst through the ground, tearing apart the palace walls as the high priest directed it toward Schneider. Seeing his magic was ineffective against the golem, the high priest braced for the worst. At that moment, the Hydra, commanded by the mysterious sorcerer, stormed into the palace, seeking to eliminate the one who had slain its master. The sight of his own summon being used against him infuriated Schneider. Enraged, Schneider called the sorcerer square-faced catfish, provoking him. The sorcerer ordered the Hydra to attack, but the golem intercepted and dealt with the beast. Desperate, the sorcerer lunged at Schneider, only to be struck down and incinerated by a fire spell. Schneider turned his attention back to the high priest, ready to continue their fight, but Yoko intervened. She admitted she was wrong to see Schneider as Lukai, and declared she no longer had feelings for him. Schneider then revealed that Lukai and he were 2 sides of the same soul. If Lukai were to die, so would he. Whoever Lukai loved, Schneider would love as well. Yoko doubted his words, so Schneider leaned in and kissed her, proving his point before reverting to Lukai. So meanwhile, one of the 4 enemy leaders sensed the magic used in the battle, realizing it was Schneider's. 15 years ago, Schneider had led their conquests, but now it appeared he was fighting to defend the kingdom. They needed to confirm whether Schneider had truly turned against them. The first of their group, the ninja master Gar, was assigned to investigate and eliminate the threat if necessary. As the high priest and ministers discussed the ominous black clouds spreading over the horizon, they realized their situation was becoming increasingly dire. Their enemy had a sword sorcerer named Kaiusu, known to be Schneider's closest ally, whose strength was nearly equal to Schneider's. Kaisu had just investigated what they had extracted from beneath the seal at their recently conquered site, the Head of Darkness. Soon they planned to press forward, aiming to capture other regions. Once they overran the last 2 kingdoms, the entire seal would break, allowing them to resurrect the darkness. Back in the palace, the ministers debated whether to awaken Schneider again, alarmed by the growing danger. Yoko, however, opposed this idea, arguing that both she and Lukai were not tools to be used at their convenience. Acknowledging that they had pushed her too hard, the ministers conceded that summoning Schneider carried too many risks. With that, Yoko took Lukai back home. As she sat deep in thought, Lukai busied himself with the laundry. Suddenly, Yoko overheard Lukai being picked on again and rushed out to defend him. She found it hard to believe that someone as gentle as Lukai could share a soul with such a ruthless being. That night, the two went to bed, unaware of the looming danger. In the shadows of the palace, Gar and his ninjas infiltrated Yoko's home, silently taking down the guards. Gar barged into her room, intending to use her as a hostage. He demanded information about Schneider, but Yoko refused to reveal anything. Frustrated, Gar tied her up, threatening to hurt her unless she talked. Just as Gar was about to make good on his threats, Lukai woke up. Yoko tried to reassure him, urging him to go back to sleep, but he had already seen too much. When he saw Gar lifting Yoko's skirt, Schneider took over, demanding Gar release his woman. Schneider explained to Gar that the 2 forced awakenings had weakened the seal, giving him the power to take control while Lukai slept. Gar, stunned to find Schneider residing within a child, seized Yoko as a hostage. Noticing the high priest's approach, Gar summoned a dragon and fled with Yoko, planning to use her to force the High Priest into surrendering Schneider. Back at his base, Gar imprisoned Yoko, while Lukai was returned to the palace. In the palace, the High Priest, unable to find another magic-wielding maiden, faced a dilemma. The princess, however, volunteered herself as the key to summon Schneider. The king, however, refused, stating that the royal kiss symbolized marriage. The princess wouldn't allow her father to cling to outdated traditions. She was determined to fight the darkness just like Yoko. Despite the king's protests, he was escorted to his chambers to avoid further conflict. Acknowledging the dangers of summoning Schneider again, the High Priest decided to take a gamble, hoping Lukai's personality might sway Schneider's actions. Schneider was awakened once more, feeling a sting of disappointment that it wasn't Yoko who brought him back. The High Priest pleaded for Schneider to rescue his daughter, but Schneider, still bitter towards the priest and resistant to Yoko's influence, dismissed his request. He believed that if he conquered the world, he could have anything he wanted. Grabbing the princess, he boldly declared that he could claim her whenever he desired. Unfazed, the princess responded with a sharp slap across his face. Undeterred, Schneider, with the princess and the soldiers in tow, marched toward Gar's hideout. Meanwhile, Gar interrogated Yoko, trying to learn the method to summon Schneider. Seeing her reluctance, he deduced that she had developed feelings for Schneider and decided to use this revelation against her. As Schneider's group advanced, they found themselves in an open field, causing the soldiers to doubt Schneider's sense of direction. However, their suspicions were quickly shattered as ninjas sprang from all directions, surrounding them. So the princess, eager to help, drew her sword but quickly found herself hindering the soldiers rather than aiding them. Schneider dispatched the ninjas with ease and ordered the princess to discard her sword and armor to move more freely. Begrudgingly, she complied, earning resentment from the soldiers, who directed their threats at Schneider. Back in the hideout, Gar, irritated by Yoko's silence, unleashed a slime creature to torment her. At that moment, Schneider reached the gate of the hideout and decided to make a grand entrance. The booming sound of his arrival caught Gar's attention. Recognizing the magical aura, Gar, curious to test their strength, allowed them to proceed. As they advanced, they encountered a towering minotaur blocking their path. It charged toward them, forcing Schneider to shield the princess from its onslaught. But she slapped him again for daring to touch her. Spotting a staircase full stark a beast, Schneider in the strain, a quick retreat. He urged the soldiers to stay behind, reminding them of their duty to guard the princess. Persuaded by his words, the soldiers stayed back. The princess, refusing to be left behind, attempted to follow. But Schneider quickly grabbed her and continued ascending the stairs. As they climbed, they encountered a fierce demon eye protected by an impenetrable barrier. Meanwhile, Yoko, stripped of her clothes by the slime, was forced by Gar to watch the showdown between him and Schneider, eager to see who would come out on top. Schneider hesitated for a moment, struggling to figure out how to bypass the demon eye's barrier. The princess, noticing that his concern for Yoko was disrupting his focus, came up with a plan. She snuck behind the demon eye, diverting its attention and weakening the barrier just enough for Schneider to land the final blow. Relieved that she had helped, the princess noticed Schneider's annoyance, which barely masked his embarrassment. Furious, he picked her up and continued their bickering as they moved through another corridor. Schneider confessed he was exhausted from overusing his magic, explaining how much it strained him mentally. He was saving his strength for the inevitable clash with Gar. Suddenly, the princess spotted a shiny sword and picked it up, unaware of its cursed nature. Carelessly swinging the blade, she accidentally nicked Schneider, infecting him with its poison. Overcome with guilt and eager to help, she asked what she could do. "Suck out the poison," Schneider commanded. Meanwhile, Gar revealed his true intentions to Yoko. They planned to control the demon god, using its power to wipe out the current world and remake it in their image. He found it odd that Schneider had yet to show up. Driven by remorse, the princess began extracting the poison from Schneider's wound. As she did, the demon within the sword awakened, furious that its rest had been disturbed. Gar noted that while Schneider was a powerful mage, he specialized in fire and wind magic. The fire demon, immune to all flames, rendered Schneider's fire magic ineffective. Forced into a defensive stance, Schneider shielded himself from the demon's relentless barrage of fire attacks. Unaffected by Schneider's counterattacks, the demon unleashed an explosion that shook the hideout, causing lava to seep through the cracks. Knowing he couldn't stay hidden forever, Schneider decided to face the demon head-on, telling the princess to stay put. Stepping out from behind his shield, Schneider met the demon's flames with his own, amplified by the demon's power. The resulting blast hurled the demon through the ceiling and into the chamber where Gar was waiting. The demon, stunned, lamented its first defeat in 300 years. With a hint of smugness, Schneider commented on the demon's youth, boasting about his own 400 years of existence. As the demon transformed back into its sword form, Schneider reunited with Yoko. Gar, observing Schneider's willingness to risk himself for a woman he hadn't even claimed, mocked his change in behavior. Schneider, however, was furious not because Yoko had been stripped, but because Gar had seen her like that before him. Amused by Schneider's jealousy, Gar prepared for their battle, predicting a swift victory. He knew that in a fight between a mage and a swordsman, whoever landed the first blow would have the upper hand. As the fight began, Schneider was caught off guard by Gar's unexpected long-range attack. Gar pressed his advantage, closing in on Schneider. Schneider parried the incoming strikes and created some distance to cast a fire spell. Charging through the flames, Gar severed Schneider's hand. Despite the injury, Schneider unleashed a powerful spell that sliced off one of Gar's hands in retaliation. Gar narrowly dodged the full impact, knowing that a direct hit would be fatal. Both fighters, driven by rage and determination, braced themselves for the final clash. Gar, aiming to shatter Schneider's resolve, taunted him with false claims about his exploits with Yoko. Yoko fiercely denied the accusations, but Schneider, indifferent to the truth, only cared about defeating Gar. As Schneider began chanting a spell, Gar countered with his own long-range attack. Schneider deflected it, causing both spells to collide in a massive explosion that tore through the hideout, reducing it to rubble. From the debris, Gar and Schneider emerged, their severed arms magically reattached by Schneider's power. Gar, noticing a change in Schneider's demeanor, went off to find the dragon hatchling. The princess returned the creature to Gar, acknowledging that Schneider's protective barrier had saved both the girls and the dragon. Accepting defeat, Gar admitted he was surprised by Schneider's potential for change despite his past cruelty. Schneider was then on the receiving end of a stern lecture from Yoko, which made Gar laugh. It was amusing to see the once feared Schneider getting scolded by a girl. Meanwhile, the princess, feeling like an imposter, was found by her soldiers. Gar then revealed troubling news: another army had attacked their kingdom while they were away. Suddenly, the dragon spoke to Schneider, expressing its belief that he hadn't forgotten it after 15 years. Elsewhere, Kaisu was busy planning their next move when he received reports about Gar's fortress falling and rumors of Gar's betrayal. Suspecting that Gar had been tricked into following Schneider, Kaisu dispatched one of the 4 heavenly kings, Ni, to deal with Schneider, fearing he was threatening their plans. Ni, who also led the army attacking the palace, received a request for negotiations, but the high priest anticipated the challenge ahead, knowing their opponent was a heavenly king. Ni, however, refused to entertain any deals and ordered the envoy's execution. Shortly afterward, a message from Keishu arrived, commanding Ni to eliminate Schneider. Shocked, Ni returned to camp to rest and prepare for what was ahead. Later, Schneider encountered Ni in an illusion. He remarked how little she had changed over the years since he saved the Dark Elf when her war-torn clan had scattered. Seeing himself as a father figure, he reminded her of his past kindness. Enraged, Ni demanded he stop manipulating her emotions. She had once loved him, only to discover his hidden harem. Schneider dismissed her anger, saying it was merely a man's desire. Unmoved, Ni shattered the illusion with a bolt of lightning and ordered her forces to locate Schneider while she focused on commanding the army. The dragon, observing Schneider's failed attempt to reconcile with Ni, wondered aloud why it followed him instead of Gar. It turned out Schneider had secretly slipped away, and the dragon had merely followed his lead. Still irritated by the dragon's company, Schneider threatened to rip it apart if it reverted to its form from 15 years ago. Suddenly, they spotted a young girl being chased by a giant spider. Schneider, wanting to play the hero, rushed to her aid. The dragon found it odd to see such a large spider in this area, but Schneider was more focused on impressing the girl. After finishing off the spider with one swift move, he noticed a talisman drop from its body, suggesting it had been summoned. Curious about the girl, who had an innocent and sweet appearance, Schneider's interest grew. She led him back to her home to express her gratitude. He quickly guessed that she might be a noble's daughter. Sensing Schneider's less than noble thoughts, the dragon tried to intervene, only to get swatted away. That evening, after dinner, Schneider went to his room. The dragon couldn't shake off the odd feeling that this place was untouched by the ongoing war. Schneider, not in the mood for small talk, silenced the dragon. Moments later, the girl entered his room, offering herself to Schneider as a way of showing her thanks. Never one to turn down such an offer, he was quick to accept. Sensing a trap, the dragon warned Schneider but got a pillow thrown at it for the interruption. As Schneider removed his shirt, he noticed bruises on the girl's shoulders, marks left by armor. Before he could react, she slapped a talisman on him, ensnaring him in a web spun by a giant spider. She revealed herself as Ari, a loyal subordinate of Ni. With his magic sealed, Schneider found himself at the mercy of the spider. However, to Ari's shock, she realized Schneider was sitting behind her. He had used an illusion to blur the lines between reality and trick her. Whispering sweet words, he preyed on her emotions. Having known only cruelty, except from her master, Ari quickly fell for Schneider's manipulative charm. The dragon, observing the situation, demanded a change of scene, declaring that this wasn't some kind of romantic drama. The next morning, Schneider decided it was time to move on. Ari informed him that Nie still hadn't forgiven him, and that another assassin awaited ahead. She feared for his life, but he reassured her they would meet again. As he left, Schneider felt a pang of regret for not being more forward with Ari the previous night, wishing he had bitten her ear harder. Meanwhile, Nie, upon learning that Ari had let Schneider go, realized the situation had taken a turn for the worse. Another person had fallen for Schneider's charm. Yet Schneider couldn't care less whether someone was friend or foe. Any girl who crossed paths with him would be instantly captivated. To Nie, Schneider was the most dangerous man for any woman. Not long after, Schneider crossed paths with the assassin Ari had warned him about Kayan. Schneider, noticing Kayan's masculine appearance, turned to the dragon and asked who looked more handsome, him or Kayan. The dragon couldn't decide, so Schneider kicked it aside. Without delay, the monstrous creature Kayan had brought charged at Schneider, who swiftly destroyed it with a single move. Kayan then approached him, demanding to know where Ari was, not believing she would betray them. With a smug grin, Schneider replied that Ari had fallen for him, and that they had already spent the night together. Furious, Kayan attacked, slicing through the air, but Schneider dodged using an illusion, countering with an explosive strike. Kayan managed to avoid the blow with an illusion of their own, forcing Schneider to draw the demon fire sword from earlier to block the next attack. In the clash, Schneider's counter shattered Kayan's armor, revealing that she was actually a woman. Unfazed, Kayan, confident in her power as second only to Nie, launched an attack that began to petrify Schneider. Irritated, Schneider thought that if he were to be turned into stone, he should at least strike a stylish pose. Realizing this was an ancient spell, he figured that breaking it would require identifying which deity had cast it. Knowing which god had originated the spell would allow him to call upon a divine ally to counter it, but with countless gods to choose from, it would take more time than he had. Kayan, determined not to let him stay intact in stone, prepared to shatter the statue to ensure that no one could come along and revive him. Just as she was about to strike, Ari summoned her spiders to intercept, fully dedicating herself to Schneider's protection. Believing Schneider was more powerful than the 4 heavenly kings combined, she vowed to stand by him, even if it meant opposing her former master. Kayan, furious, fought off Ari's spiders and resolved to kill both of them. In the heat of battle, she inadvertently mentioned the name of her deity, giving Schneider the crucial information needed to break the petrification spell. Schneider, feeling smug about his appearance, disgusted Kayan, who resumed her assault. However, Schneider then revealed that the deity she served was actually subordinate to the gods he was aligned with, rendering her spell ineffective. He fired an arrow that caused Kayan's clothing to be blown off. Tauntingly, he mentioned he was going easy on her because she was a woman. In response, Kayan summoned a Kaza, a beast she controlled through a crystal. The monster could emit a gas that caused petrification, and since the gas wasn't magical in nature, Schneider had to avoid breathing it in. He tried to pull Ari in the opposite direction of the wind to evade the gas, but whenever the beast wasn't releasing the gas, it would stomp its feet aggressively. Before long, Schneider's arm began to turn to stone. In a desperate move to protect Schneider, Ari stepped into the path of the gas, redirecting it back toward Kayan. In her haste, Kayan dropped the crystal, causing the monster to lose control. With his confidence returning, Schneider quickly handled the now uncontrolled creature. With a single explosive spell, he brought the beast down. Surprised, he turned to Kayan, expecting her to be grateful. Instead, she asked him to end her life, warning that he would regret it if he didn't. Schneider, however, simply told her she could try to take his life whenever she wished. Then, showing an unexpected act of kindness, he helped her by absorbing the toxic gas from her system. Afterwards, he asked Ari to look after Kayan while he continued his journey. Kayan warned him about Nie's final subordinate, account skilled in immortality techniques, and said to be the strongest of them all. Schneider nodded, thanked her for the information, and set off on his way. As he left, Kayan began to understand Ari's growing feelings for Schneider. After traveling for a while, Schneider realized that he had expended too much of his magic, allowing the seal on Lukai to strengthen. Slowly, he transformed back into Lukai, leaving the dragon uncertain about what to do next. Meanwhile, back at the palace, the princess had returned, and the high priest informed her that Yoko had gone with the soldiers to search for Schneider. They had been overwhelmed by a horde of monsters, but Gar and his 2,000 ninja troops had arrived just in time to assist in their defense. As Lukai and the dragon wandered, searching for Yoko, Lukai happened to stumble upon her bathing in a lake. Yoko let out a joyful shout, prompting the soldiers to rush over and check on the situation. This time, however, she really screamed in alarm and hurriedly chased them away. It seemed kids had their own set of privileges. The soldiers were stunned to learn that the young boy before them was actually the infamous dark sorcerer, Schneider. They then turned their attention to the dragon, and Yoko suddenly remembered its name, Lars. The soldiers were even more shocked, because Lars was the name of the princess's brother, who had been granted the title of Dragon Knight, and was one of the 5 heroes who defeated Schneider years ago. Since he had vanished after the battle, no one knew if Lars was alive or dead. They began to suspect that this dragon might be the reincarnation of Prince Lars. Meanwhile, the count that Kayan had mentioned earlier had received word that 2 of Nee's subordinates had been defeated by Schneider. Determined to be well prepared, he was confident that Schneider would not be able to defeat his immortal body. To further enhance his powers, he required the blood of virgins. Among the captured girls brought to him by his vile underlings, one had already been defiled. Enraged, he drained his subordinate's blood as punishment. At the same time, a werewolf prowled the area, hunting young women. Yoko, who was putting Lukai to sleep, sensed a powerful demonic presence and immediately alerted the soldiers to prepare for battle. When they confronted the werewolf, it easily knocked them aside with a single swipe. Eyeing Yoko hungrily, it moved to devour her just as Schneider woke up. Sneering, Schneider insulted the creature, calling it a mere dog. Enraged, the werewolf lunged at him, but Schneider barely felt a thing. He retaliated with a powerful punch, pinning the beast to the ground. With a flick of his wrist, Schneider unleashed his ultimate magic Hellfire, severely burning the werewolf. Terrified and in agony, the creature called out to the Count for help. Schneider, now realizing that only a vampire could command a werewolf, began to wonder why an immortal vampire would serve under Nee. He suspected that the Count was gathering the blood of virgins to increase his own power, possibly aiming to overthrow both Nee and Kaisu. Demanding answers, he promised to spare the werewolf's life if it confessed. But just as the creature began to confirm Schneider's suspicions, it was brutally silenced, its head crushed under a heavy boot. Yoko then confronted Schneider about leaving and turning back into Lukai. She also demanded to know the names of the 2 girls he had mentioned earlier, threatening to deny him sleep until he answered. Slightly intimidated, Schneider asked for more time. Meanwhile, the Count, who had been observing from the shadows, realized that Schneider was not fully revived and was still sealed within the boy's body. He recalled how Schneider had once rebelled against the 4 kingdoms with his disciples and grew stronger with every reincarnation. At his peak, Schneider would be unbeatable, but in his current state, the Count believed he could take him down. Descending with his forces, the Count managed to trap Schneider once again. Noticing that Lukai had awakened, he quickly ordered his men to seize both Lukai and Yoko and transport them to his castle. Gloating, the Count reveled in how easily he had captured the legendary sorcerer and gained 3 virgin girls as a bonus. Aside from Yoko, the other 2 captives were Ari and Kayan, who had also been brought in. Both Ari and Kayan despised the Count, just as they had in the past. However, they had intentionally allowed themselves to be captured to confront him directly. They quickly freed themselves from their restraints. Enraged by his subordinates' incompetence, the Count drained their blood in fury. Confident in his belief that consuming the magic-infused blood of both girls would grant him immense power, he prepared to face them. Ari and Kayan, using their talismans and sword skills, launched a combined attack on him. But even after taking the full force of their assault, his regenerative abilities proved too strong. Kayan then drew out a crucifix and garlic in an attempt to weaken him. Feigning fear, the Count tricked her, catching her off guard, and seized her. He began draining blood from Kayan's hand, convinced that it would make him more powerful than both Nee and Kaisu. Seeing this, Ari stepped in, placing her faith in Schneider to stop the Count's evil intentions. The Count scoffed at Ari's words, mocking her hope. He pointed out that their only chance of survival was locked away in the chamber above. With a smirk, he revealed the truth about Schneider's seal to the girls. Lars finally pieced it together, realizing that the High Priestess had implanted Lukai's personality into Schneider's reincarnated body. For the past 15 years, Lukai's persona had been dominant, keeping Schneider at bay except when Lukai was asleep. The Count taunted them, saying that once he took care of Schneider, their threat would be over, and he would become the most powerful of all. So up above, Lukai began to stir, his power building up. Meanwhile, Gar led the soldiers in battle against the swarming monsters, launching a giant dart to clear a path through the enemy. He couldn't help but wonder what Schneider was up to at that moment. Below, Schneider was struggling to wrest control from Lukai after witnessing the Count's mistreatment of the girls. Yet Lukai's grip was too strong. Seeing Schneider's continued entrapment, the Count sighed in relief and advanced toward Ari to drain her blood. But before he could reach her, Yoko kicked him square in the face, enraging him. He turned to lash out at her, but this became the breaking point for Schneider. Enraged by the threat to Yoko, he finally shattered the hold and broke free from his prison. Schneider stepped forward, his eyes blazing with fury. He vowed that the Count would pay for laying a hand on his Yoko and unleashed a fierce attack combining lightning and ice magic. However, when the magical assault cleared, the Count stood unharmed, believing himself superior. With newfound confidence, he charged at Schneider, firing a beam from his eyes. So the three girls watched in horror as the beam seemed to strike its target, leaving behind only Schneider's arm. Determined to protect Kai, Ari stood up to face the Count, but he only laughed, claiming that her hope was in vain. As he continued to mock them, Schneider's laughter joined in. He revealed that the one hit by the beam was not him, but one of the Count's own minions. Realizing his mistake too late, the Count tried to fire again, but his subordinate got caught in the crossfire. Schneider then positioned himself protectively in front of Yoko and absorbed the Count's attack, sending it back at him. The Count, believing he had dodged the counterstrike, suddenly noticed the rising sun. Sunlight streamed through the chamber, burning him to ashes. Despite his power, the Count was still vulnerable to daylight. Lars, thinking Schneider had finished off the Count, was startled when a bat emerged from the ashes. Swiftly, Schneider grabbed the bat, knowing that if it reached its sanctuary, the Count would resurrect in 2 days. He tore off a piece of the bat's wing to perform a spell, implanting it into the creature. If the Count ever tried to reclaim his body, the spell would activate, turning him into a leper and preventing any future resurrection. The Count screamed in fury and despair while Schneider laughed at his fate. Terrified, the Count's remaining forces fled. Schneider then helped Ari retrieve Kai and instructed her to take Kai to the temple for healing. He checked on Yoko to ensure she was unharmed. Both girls questioned him about the other girl he had mentioned. Schneider simply stated that Yoko was the one he had chosen, while Ari's fate remained uncertain. Meanwhile, Gar had defeated nearly all the monsters, with only a few remaining. Kaishu, who had been observing everything, was shocked at how Schneider had managed to sway nearly all of their subordinates. The last of the 4 heavenly kings, Abigail, suspected that Ni might betray them because of her connection to Schneider. If Ni confidently claimed she wouldn't betray them, Abigail warned she would use the same spell Schneider had once used on her. Ni challenged Abigail to prove her point. Without hesitation, Abigail cast the spell on Ni and warned her to behave, or she would be turned into a toad. Kaizu later thought Abigail was overreacting, but Abigail explained that Ni had lived alongside Schneider for a century and was closer to him than anyone else, making this drastic action necessary. Kaizu knew that Schneider had always been ruthless to both his enemies and allies, yet he hadn't killed Gar or Ni's 3 followers. What had changed in Schneider over the past 15 years? Abigail realized they had to split up Schneider's army and Kaisu's forces to break the remaining 2 seals. Meanwhile, Ni was to hold Schneider down to resurrect the darkness. For the plan to succeed, Schneider's heart was needed. If Ni wanted to survive, she would have to kill Schneider. If Schneider wanted to save Ni, he would have to sacrifice himself. One of them was destined to die. As Schneider and Yoko said their goodbyes to Ari, who was taking Kai for treatment, they prepared to depart. Climbing onto the carriage, Ari knew deep down that she would never earn Schneider's love, but hoped he would at least remember her. Yoko warned Schneider not to play with people's emotions, insisting that if he decided to pursue someone, he needed to stay loyal. Meanwhile, Gar had a tense encounter with Ni, who demanded to know why he had turned against them. Gar simply replied that he found more happiness following Schneider. Without further delay, they unleashed their most powerful sword techniques. Gar soon recognized Ni's weapon as the legendary Thunder God sword, one of the strongest of its kind. His own blade was also legendary, but it didn't match up to the power of hers. Clenching his sword between his teeth, Gar hurled a barrage of kunai, followed by a massive dart to force Ni into the air. His dragon then attacked, creating an opening for him to land a critical strike. However, his blade struck only a demon as Ni appeared behind him, ready to counterattack. Their clash split the bridge in 2, and it seemed Gar had been struck down. Yet, he reappeared unscathed, having used a shadow clone technique to avoid injury. Returning to the bridge, Gar began removing his armor, realizing it was too heavy and useless against the Thunder God's sword. He then unleashed his long-range technique, using both hands this time. A storm of swords flew toward Ni, but she knew only one of them was real. She pinpointed the true attack and blocked it, but the force was overwhelming, breaking her sword in half. Everyone believed Gar had secured victory. Thinking Ni was now defenseless without her sword, Gar announced that he would spare her life since she was important to Schneider. The officials inside were in awe of Gar's strength, confused about why he had suddenly chosen to side with them. Furious, Ni accused Gar of abandoning Kaisu's vision of an equal society. Gar shrugged off her words, caring little for Kaisu's ideals as long as he was happy. Despite her broken weapon, Ni charged forward, channeling lightning magic into the remnants of her sword. Underestimating her, Gar rushed to meet her head-on, only to realize too late that his sword couldn't withstand the attack. He was struck, and Ni explained that the true Thunder God sword was not the physical blade, but the power of lightning it carried. Gar was on the verge of defeat when a blast of magic suddenly hit, knocking both him and Ni back. The princess recognized the caster on the other side. It was none other than Schneider. The entire bridge had collapsed, effectively halting any advance by the enemy. Schneider casually mentioned that this spell was a new one he had created, though he admitted he still had trouble controlling it. Gar cursed Schneider for nearly hitting him with a spell, grumbling that if Schneider wanted to experiment, he shouldn't be using his allies as test subjects. Ni looked on, saddened to see Schneider with another woman. She had waited for him, believing that their bond would remain unbroken. Even after being reborn, he continued to cause her heartache. Resolving to end things, she vowed to take Schneider's life that day. But before she could act, Schneider appeared behind her, overpowering her with an oddly intimate approach. Meanwhile, Gar, injured and munching on dried food, dragged himself along the ground, but nobody paid him any mind. After hearing Schneider's confession of love, Ni hesitated. However, the seal Abigail had placed on her caused her to push Schneider away. Calling for her mount, she fled the scene. The princess, now safe, sighed in relief as her kingdom had been spared. Anne, however, flew away with a broken heart. She and Schneider had shared so much and had been bound by a deep connection. She was even willing to forgive all his past transgressions and abandon her ideals for an equal society, if it meant being with him, if only he weren't cursed. That evening, Gar warned Schneider that Ni was now far stronger than before. He cautioned that underestimating her could lead to his demise. Overhearing their conversation, Yoko grew curious about the true nature of Schneider and Ni's relationship. The High Priestess noticed it had started to rain, which meant the enemy was unlikely to attack, giving them time to repair their defenses. Yoko went to the mess hall to personally distribute food and lift the soldiers' spirits. Everyone seemed cheered by her presence, except for Schneider, who received a small portion. Unhappy, he ate quickly in hopes of asking for more, but Yoko still gave him very little, leaving him fuming with frustration. The two argued fiercely, with Yoko's anger fueled by Schneider's constant flirting with other women. Schneider brushed it off, saying it was no big deal and joking that all the good-looking men were disappearing. In the end, Schneider couldn't win the argument and reluctantly admitted defeat. Everyone was in awe of Yoko, realizing she had complete control over the Dark Sorcerer. Later that night, the princess and the High Priestess visited the Oracle, a woman who could glimpse into the future. The High Priestess asked the Oracle to check on the seal within Schneider, explaining how he had awakened twice in Lukai's body and had most recently transformed into his sorcerer form without Yoko's kiss. The Oracle confirmed that Schneider had used sheer willpower to break free of the seal. However, someone as wicked as the old Schneider wouldn't have been able to convince the goddess to weaken the seal. The true reason was that Schneider had changed. He now understood love and had persuaded the goddess to loosen it. Suddenly, the Oracle had a vision of Schneider losing his heart and dying. Gar noticed Yoko looking worried and told her that defeating Ni would be tough. Now both Schneider and Ni had equal strength, and if they fought, the one who ran out of energy first would lose. While the old Schneider would have been ruthless, the current one had become too kind-hearted. However, this kindness also made Schneider more approachable. Yoko went to speak with Schneider and overheard the princess warning him about the vision of his death. Schneider was surprised the Oracle was still alive and dismissed her warnings, claiming that someone as handsome as him could never lose, let alone die. The high officials thought he might be plotting something, but the princess chose to trust him. He had protected the kingdom many times, and she didn't want him to sacrifice any more for it. Schneider laughed, saying his goal was still world domination and that he was only building his army for himself. Meanwhile, the Oracle and the High Priest discovered a sudden surge of dark magic in Ni. It seemed she had used this storm of hatred to blind them. Schneider then decided to teach the princess a lesson about the dangers of entering a man's room at midnight. She was even willing to offer herself to him if it meant he would stay. However, Yoko barged in and threw Lars at Schneider. Suddenly, he sensed a spell being cast, and as he finished his sentence, the palace crumbled under a powerful wave of destructive magic. Gar realized that only Schneider was capable of casting such a spell, but since he was also caught in the blast, Ni was the only possible culprit. Seeing Schneider with another woman had made Ni even angrier and more determined to kill him. Caught off guard, Schneider didn't have time to create a larger barrier. Despite the princess and Yoko pleading with him not to fight, Ni came right at him, leaving no way to avoid the clash. Borrowing 500 yen from Yoko, Schneider went out to face. Nar noticed that Ni's sword had been restored and grew worried that Schneider was in real trouble. Schneider used a flight spell to engage Ni, but she used a technique to drain his magic power, causing him to crash to the ground. Nee's plan to block Schneider's greatest strength, his magic, left him vulnerable. She attacked from her mount while Schneider tried to defend with a wall of fire, but it was quickly absorbed, leaving him open to Nee's strikes. Cigar, frustrated that he couldn't help, watched as the demon from the fire sword appeared to aid Schneider, so the demon declared Schneider its master and vowed to protect him. Schneider gripped his sword and faced Nee, targeting her mount to bring her down. As the ground beneath him crumbled, both he and Nee fell, continuing their fight. Nee was surprised to see him wielding the flame sword but wasn't too concerned, believing her thunder beast within her sword was stronger than the fire demon. The two swords clashed, releasing beams of light that made everyone think this would be a close fight. However, a mage and a sword duel is clearly at a disadvantage. Both swords were incredibly powerful, so there was a high chance the fight would end in a single strike. Gar knew they were each pouring all their strength into one final attack. They stared each other down for a tense moment before Nee made the first move, putting Schneider on the defensive. The demon sword made a daring choice, sacrificing itself to pull the thunder sword's essence into a ball of lightning, destroying them both in the process. With the thunder sword now gone, Nee lost her greatest weapon against Schneider. However, she immediately lunged forward, driving a blade straight into his head. Everyone thought it was the end, but Schneider stood back up. With the ball of energy gone, he could now use his magic freely again. Yet, it was important to remember that Nee was once his student, so her magic skills were nearly as powerful as his. The two began chanting spells at the same time, rising into the air and unleashing their lightning magic with equal intensity. Gar watched, realizing that whoever hesitated first or ran out of energy would be the one to lose. As they continued, both used advanced fire magic, engulfing the entire area around them in flames. Gar knew they were on a path to destroy each other and tried to intervene, but they had already finished chanting and charged at each other. Halfway through their flight, Schneider was hit with memories of his past with Nee. In that brief moment, he lost focus and was struck by Nee's attack. Gar noticed that Schneider was being swayed by his emotions, causing him to lose control of the fire. Meanwhile, Nee grew angrier, seeing how much Schneider had changed. The princess feared that Schneider was gone for good, but Yoko disagreed. She confidently declared he wasn't finished because he still owed her money. She had taught Schneider to always repay his debts, no matter what. From the rubble, Schneider emerged, appearing stronger than before. He boasted that he wasn't weak and there was no reason to worry, though in reality, he was nursing several injuries. Nee refused to give up and was still determined to end Schneider's life. But Schneider, getting up once more, confessed that he still loved her. She wasn't fooled, reminding him that he had said those words to every woman he met. With that, she summoned a host of lightning spirits. This was risky because if she lost focus, the spirits would turn against her. Forced to respond, Schneider summoned fire spirits to counter them. The two then began chasing each other, battling as they flew. Schneider couldn't grasp why Nee and Kaizu were so obsessed with their ideals. She revealed her dream of building a peaceful society, which Schneider mocked as foolish. He believed that war and conflict were natural to humans, and any peace she sought would only be temporary. In the past, during the brutal conflict between humans and fairies, hybrids like her half-human, half-fairy were rejected by both sides. The chaos left her abandoned in a world that had no place for her. This inspired her desire to create a society where people like her could belong. Schneider moved closer, reminding Nee of their first encounter and the 100 years they spent together, moments filled with happiness. She admitted those years were like paradise, but the curse on her hand forced her to push him away. Abigail watched with a twisted smile, while Kaizu was uneasy, knowing that if Nee fell, only the two of them would remain to face Schneider. Nee, still believing that Schneider was trying to manipulate her, launched into another attack. Gar noticed something unusual in the behavior of the fire spirits, suspecting Schneider was reaching his limit. Despite this, Nee kept up her offensive, convinced that to Schneider she was just an adopted daughter, a whim. However, to her, Schneider was both her savior and the one she loved most. She struck him hard, hoping he wouldn't get up again, yet he stood even as the curse continued to consume her. Nee's electric spirits started to go out of control, attacking Yoko. Seeing Yoko in danger caused concern for Schneider. However, Nee managed to regain control, setting up a barrier to shield both herself and Schneider from the rogue spirits. She then pretended to maintain full command over her powers, deceiving Schneider into thinking she was stable. In a final move, Nee used Yoko as a threat, making Schneider face a serious decision. They both prepared to cast an ultimate spell, one that Schneider had not yet mastered. This spell was a form of destruction magic capable of leveling the entire area. Nee concealed her curse, hiding it from Schneider as the spell unfolded. Gar, observing the scene, realized Nee was now at a significant disadvantage. Yoko, unable to watch them tear each other apart, urged Gar to intervene. But he knew stepping in meant certain death. The two combatants were now beyond hearing them, and the spell, once unleashed, could not be recalled. As the attack progressed, Schneider suddenly heard Lukai's voice, urging him to recognize the agony of the woman he loved. In that moment, he understood Ni's curse and realized it was the work of Abigail. Lukai knew that Ni, unwilling to live in the form of a toad, hoped for Schneider to end her suffering. Just as she was about to accept her fate, Schneider, filled with fury at Abigail's interference, redirected his spell away. The beam of light soared into the sky, dissipating its energy harmlessly. Then, he approached Ni, determined to set her free. Without hesitation, he pierced her chest and pulled out her heart, shattering the curse right before her eyes. The onlookers were stunned by Schneider's actions. The oracle acknowledged the fulfillment of her prophecy, while Yoko fainted from shock. Ni, however, was left in anguish, mourning the loss of Schneider. Meanwhile, Abigail took pleasure in the outcome, seeing the threat to their plan finally removed. Alongside Kaisu, Abigail began dismantling the two barriers protecting the neighboring kingdoms. On Kaisu's front, he simply froze the entire kingdom, leaving it helpless and unable to resist. Abigail, on the other hand, unleashed an army of undead, sweeping through the last defenses. Yoko approached Schneider's lifeless body, tears streaming down her face. She leaned in and placed a final kiss on his lips before turning away. At that moment, Lars arrived, revealing that he had been searching for someone worthy of inheriting the title of Dragon Knight. Ironically, Schneider, his former adversary, was the one who fit the role best. Suddenly, Schneider's body began to glow, transforming back into Lukai. Meanwhile, Kaisu and Abigail neared the completion of their ritual to revive the Dark God. While the king, sensing the impending catastrophe, understood that the resurrection of the Dark God would spell doom for humanity, just as it had centuries ago when monsters first appeared. So that disaster had once forced humans to band together for survival. Determined to prevent history from repeating, he resolved to inform the princess about the seal they held. Gar, having caught wind of the brewing conflict, knew that a great war was coming. While he believed they could manage bones and undead creatures, something far more dreadful was about to arise. He thought Ni must be devastated by Schneider's apparent death, yet she hadn't considered ending her own life as a means of atonement. Her focus was solely on fighting for vengeance. Abigail, confident in their plan to resurrect the Dark God, boasted that they had already gathered most of its body. Only its brain, which controlled its will, remained missing. Gar advised Ni to use the devastating spells she had employed in their last battle. However, one spell required the lightning sword, while the other could only be cast under a full moon. Ni soon encountered the enemy commander, a being with the strength of the vampire count, encased in armor tougher than any blade, and with near invulnerability to magic. Meanwhile, Abigail proceeded with the Dark God's revival, bypassing the need for its brain. As this unfolded, Lars realized that Lukai had reverted back into Schneider just as the Dark God opened its eyes. At that very moment, Schneider regained consciousness. The High Priest, gazing at the sky, sensed the breaking of the two seals and felt a strange change in Schneider. Ni formulated a plan to take down the commander, leaving Gar and his ninja army to handle the hordes of undead. Once the commander was defeated, the High Priest intended to use his undead banishing techniques to clear the battlefield. Yoko arrived just in time to witness Schneider's heart being restored. As the Dark God came to life, the evil energy surrounding it began to revive Schneider. Gar and Ni struggled against the commander, unable to land a single blow, and were thrown aside effortlessly. The commander then revealed that the Dark God's awakening had amplified the strength of all who were born from darkness, including himself and Abigail. However, he was unaware that another had been empowered as well, the one who, despite regaining his heart, had not yet started beating. Yoko rushed forward and slapped Schneider hard across the face. "Get up," she shouted, threatening to leave him if he didn't. Her words jolted Schneider awake, and he slowly rose to his feet. The High Priest noticed immediately that Schneider was now even stronger than he had been 15 years ago. Gar and Ni acknowledged Schneider's return, but the commander sneered, telling them they still stood no chance of defeating him. So the commander was a creation of the dark sorcerer Dazay, brought forth by a powerful summoning spell. Abigail had provided him with enchanted demon armor and fused his being with the corpses of the 100 mightiest warriors, making him nearly unbeatable. Unimpressed by his boasting, Gar and Ni combined their strongest abilities to launch an all-out attack. However, their combined assault barely left a mark on the undead warrior. Dazay, smug and taunting, ridiculed both Gar and Ni before commanding the commander to finish them off. Just as the zombie warrior prepared to deliver the final blow, Schneider appeared out of nowhere, beating the commander into submission despite his impenetrable armor. Not content with just that, Schneider cast an explosion spell, blasting away both the commander and the meddlesome necromancer. Gar, overjoyed, rushed to see his mentor and dear friend alive. Ni, equally ecstatic, couldn't resist running over to embrace the one she loved. With the zombie legion defeated, the people of the kingdom hailed Schneider as a hero. While many believed that Schneider had been resurrected, the high priest and Lars knew the truth. The awakening of the dark god had activated a surge of dark power within him, granting him his newfound abilities. That night, Schneider disguised himself as Santa Claus to sneak into Yoko's room and return the 500 yen he had borrowed. However, Yoko woke up and demanded interest on the debt. Schneider, admitting he had no more money, suggested paying her with his services, only to be promptly whacked in the face by Yoko wielding a spiked mace. Abigail, furious at hearing of his minions' defeat, quickly ordered more of his warriors to cause chaos in the kingdom. This time, he sent the one-eyed demon, who wielded the demon mace, one of the 3 legendary weapons of destruction in Abigail's arsenal. Assigned to control the one-eyed demon was a drunken dwarf who led his underlings into the city, spreading havoc and slaughtering the citizens. Just as the dwarf was about to harm a young girl, Schneider appeared, delivering a swift beating. Enraged at the disrespect, the dwarf ordered the one-eyed demon to attack Schneider. However, Schneider easily defeated it with his lightning cannon spell. But to everyone's shock, the wounds on the demon healed instantly, and it mutated in even more grotesque form. The creature then swung the demon mace, slamming it into the ground to create towering pillars of stone in an attempt to trap Schneider. Such a simple trick was nothing for Schneider, who prided himself on being handsome and cool. He effortlessly escaped the stone trap and incinerated the demon with fire magic. Yet, the creature regenerated again, transforming into an even more powerful state thanks to the cells of the dark god grafted into its body. The one-eyed demon, now fully charged, struck the ground with its mace, destroying a large section of the city in an instant. Schneider narrowly dodged the devastating blow and noticed that the demon's body was beginning to reject the dark god's implanted tissue. Formulating a plan, Schneider called on Ni and Gar to join the battle and hold the creature back to buy him some time. The 3 unleashed a flurry of powerful attacks, pushing the demon back. Once ready, Schneider cast a forbidden flame spell, targeting the demon. The creature erected a barrier to shield itself, but Schneider kicked the dwarf inside the barrier, ensuring he would vanish forever along with the spell. The spell, too dangerous to be recorded, worked flawlessly. Schneider claimed all the credit, leaving Gar irritated since neither she nor Ni had actually bought him time to chant such a long spell. Schneider then launched into a complex explanation of the spell's mechanics to Yoko. Gar, struggling to grasp all the details, watched as Yoko scolded Schneider, forbidding him from using such risky spells again. Losing 2 battles in a row drove Abigail into a bitter frenzy, more eager for revenge than ever. He began plotting to summon the most powerful of his undead, a being with immense magic and near immortal resilience. This creature was sealed away in the deepest part of an underground labyrinth, unknown to any adventurer. Known as the King of the Zombies, this monstrous entity was Abigail's last hope for total chaos. Meanwhile, the kingdom fell into disorder, not just because of Abigail's forces, but also due to Schneider's reckless actions that left many people homeless. The king grew increasingly worried that riots would soon break out as the treasury was quickly depleting. The princess suggested moving the seal to a different location to alleviate the suffering of their people, but this wasn't feasible. In the western part of the kingdom, a massive storm suddenly formed, signaling a great misfortune on its way. The high priest, having lost 2 demonic weapons, pondered what made these powers so wicked to earn the name demonic weapons. Meanwhile, Gar, feeling much better, thought that Ni, without her magical sword, wasn't as formidable as before. However, Ni wasn't keen on relying solely on the sword. She also sensed that Schneider had changed, likely influenced by Yoko. The storm swept across the land, leaving death in its wake, and those who glimpsed its center saw a grim reaper with glowing red eyes. Inside, Schneider was lying down while Yoko cleaned his ears, mentioning how much she missed Lukai. Schneider considered letting her see Lukai for a bit, but before he could break the seal, Gar rushed in to report an urgent situation. Schneider glanced out the window and saw the storm approaching, realizing the death god was already at their doorstep. The high priest explained that while countless evil creatures roamed the world, the immortals were the most frightening. Armed with potent magic and ancient secrets, they far surpassed human capabilities. He wondered how human society had managed to create such beings. It was then revealed that the death god outside was one of these immortal demons. His name was Lick. 50 years ago, the 4 royal families guarding the seals originated from the Purple Kingdom, a land once known for its mild climate and lush greenery. However, in a single night, the entire kingdom was transformed into a barren swamp where nothing could grow. According to old records, 4 individuals had become liches through an immortality spell, each with their own dungeon, and were once powerful priests and sorcerers. Exactly half a century ago, in one of those dungeons, someone foolishly tested an explosion spell. The resulting shockwave was so powerful it broke the Lich's seal, turning the entire Purple Kingdom into a wasteland. Yoko didn't need to hear the name of that fool, she knew exactly who it was. Schneider, Gar, and Nee prepared to confront the Lich. Gar was puzzled about how Abigail could convince the Lich to fight, given its immense power. Schneider explained that he had destroyed the Lich's dungeon in the past, and Abigail had used this as bait to provoke the Lich into seeking revenge. To defend the city, Schneider conjured a barrier of fire to block the advance of the dark mist. However, the Lich was unfazed, walking through the flames as if they were nothing. Enraged, Schneider taunted the Lich, who revealed he wasn't there for some trivial grudge from the past. In response, the Lich cast a spell that summoned hundreds of evil spirits. Schneider continued to provoke him, prompting the Lich to unleash an aura so vile that it corrupted everything it touched. For a moment, it seemed like Schneider was done for, but he managed to withstand the attack. Meanwhile, Yoko sensed a disturbance coming from the storage area for the demonic weapons. And he also felt that the energies from both sides were dwindling. Gar urged Schneider to use his previous trick, but he hesitated, fearing Yoko's disapproval. Instead, he unleashed a barrage of magical artillery at the Lich. However, the Lich conjured a shield to nullify the spell. Being a former priest, such magic was trivial for him. Normally, using this shield would have restricted the Lich from casting other spells, but he had a backup plan, the Satan Ring, the final artifact of a powerful trio. He chanted an incantation, creating a black hole aimed at sucking Schneider into another dimension. Schneider warned the others to stay back, fearing they too would be pulled in. The High Priest and Lars quickly recognized that maintaining the black hole required an immense amount of magical energy. The High Priest suddenly felt his own power being drained and realized it was a secondary effect of the demonic mace, which was siphoning magic and channeling it into the Satan Ring. Yoko and Lars immediately rushed to inspect the storage room. Meanwhile, Nee, seeing Schneider on the brink of being dragged into the void, didn't hesitate to leap in to save him. The pull of the black hole grew stronger, and as the Lich mocked them, Schneider made a tough decision. To protect Nee, he let go, surrendering to the pull of the abyss. Gar rushed over, trying to hold Nee back, but she let go of her sword and leaped into the black hole after Schneider. Meanwhile, in the vault containing the demon armor and demonic mace, Yoko unexpectedly came face to face with Abigail. After watching his comrades vanish into the void, Gar remained steadfast, ready to confront the Lich regardless of the risk. Abigail sneered, revealing to Yoko that the 3 artifacts had combined their powers to create the black hole, and assured her that Schneider was gone for good. But Yoko stood firm, challenging one of the 4 heavenly kings with unwavering determination. Her sheer confidence made Abigail hesitate for a moment as she boldly declared that Schneider would not be so easily defeated. Still believing that Schneider and Nee were alive, Gar chose to battle the Lich using the Holy Sword. Summoning the ultimate technique, Demon God's Sword, he charged at the Lich with lightning speed, aiming to cut him down. Yet, the move did nothing against the immortal being. The Lich teleported behind Gar, muttered an incantation, and blasted him into a rock. Thanks to his armor, Gar survived, but he knew another hit would be fatal. With no other option, Gar decided to tap into the hidden power of the Holy Sword, hoping for a slim chance of victory. This sacred weapon, passed down through generations of legendary warriors, possessed the ability to dispel demons and dark forces. However, using its true power would drain the user's life force, ultimately leading to death. Despite knowing the cost, Gar was ready to sacrifice himself to free his comrades from their eternal prison. As he gathered his strength, Gar was struck again, pushing his body to its limits. Despite the immense pain, he managed to stand and skillfully wielded the Holy Sword, launching fiery slashes at the demon. But his efforts fell short. The demonic mace had absorbed half his strength, leaving his attack insufficient to destroy the Lich. In his weakened state, even a light touch from the Death God could be his end. Driven by sheer determination, Gar launched another attack using the demon sword. This time, his strike was powerful enough to challenge the Lich's immortality. But the cowardly Lich used the power of the Satan Ring to regenerate, unaware that this would open the prison from within. Inside, Nee's lightning beast emerged, lunging at the Lich and sinking its fangs into his shoulder. Right behind it came the blazing sword, followed by Schneider and Nee. Enraged by the Lich's audacity and for harming his dear friend, Schneider gripped the blazing sword and charged, reducing the Lich to ashes. As he faded away, the Lich lamented that he never uncovered the power that lay beyond the evil god. With the battle over, Schneider turned to Gar, ready to send him off to his eternal rest. Unable to bear Schneider's cold demeanor, Gar came back from the brink of death and scolded him. Schneider, noticing that the sword had drained Gar's life force, offered neither prayer nor comfort. Instead, he coldly told Gar to give up on Ni. Gar was confused, as he realized that, rather than draining his life force, the sword had actually filled him with power. Ni pondered the power greater than the evil god that the Lich had mentioned. At that moment, the Satan ring suddenly took flight, reuniting with the other two artifacts. Yoko noticed Abigail's plan unraveling. Knowing that the Lich was defeated, Abigail planned to regroup and return to claim all three artifacts. He tried to leave the vault to scheme his next move, but the kingdom's soldiers blocked his way. With the power of his tentacle armor, Abigail effortlessly cut down anyone who stood in his path. Yoko had closed the door to trap him inside, but he broke through and escaped. Sensing that something was off, Ni returned, only to find her former ally causing chaos. Abigail assumed Ni had come to settle the score over the curse, but she clarified that it was her own choice, not something forced upon her. It was clear to Abigail that love had changed Ni. She once despised Schneider, but his self-sacrifice to save her had wiped away all her hatred, leaving only love. Now, beyond wanting revenge on Abigail for what he did to Schneider, Ni had found a new resolve. Ni also wanted to ask Abigail about the mysterious power the Lich had mentioned. He refused to give away any details, so she decided she would force him to talk. Abigail felt confident he could defeat Ni, thanks to his tentacle armor. This wasn't just a magical living entity, it also acted as a lightning rod that could nullify any of Ni's lightning attacks. Determined to test its limits, Ni cast her most powerful lightning spell to see if the armor could truly withstand it. The impact of the spell was intense, affecting both Abigail and Ni. The High Priest, sensing something was happening in the vault, grew anxious for his daughter's safety. Despite the massive lightning strike, Abigail emerged unscathed and grabbed Ni from behind. But Nebraska had anticipated this move. She wasn't just skilled in lightning magic, she also commanded the wind. Summoning a sharp whirlwind, she blew Abigail away. Although he bragged about being empowered by the demon, he dared her to see if her magic could actually harm him. Standing his ground, he still refused to answer any of her questions. In response, Ni decided to push her powers further and prepare another strike. Elsewhere, in the royal tent, the general commander spoke to the king about finding a way to get rid of Schneider and the 4 heavenly kings under his command. He feared that Schneider might secretly overthrow them at any time. Overhearing this while eating noodles nearby, Schneider poured the broth over the commander's head to teach him a lesson for being so devious. He reminded them not to get ahead of themselves because he still held the fate of the kingdom in his hands. The king quickly humbled himself, expressing his gratitude for Schneider and Gar, who had saved the kingdom from countless disasters. Pushing the topic aside, Schneider turned to the princess with a question. She knew he wanted to ask about the secret of the final seal. The king tried to stop her from revealing anything, but the high priest intervened, letting her speak. Meanwhile, Abigail, now badly injured from Ni's whirlwind attack, staggered back. Ni confronted him, accusing him of lying about his vision for an ideal society. She knew that once the demon was fully unleashed, it would destroy the world until nothing was left, and someone like him couldn't control it. Taking advantage of the moment, Ni summoned the Thunder Beast, transforming it into the Thunder God Sword to put an end to the demon cultist. Back in the royal tent, the princess began to reveal the secrets of the ancient seal. The 4 oldest royal families on the continent had been tasked with containing the god of destruction, so their role in protecting the seal had been the foundation of the royal bloodlines. She then revealed that the final seal wasn't a physical object, it was hidden within her own body. But she begged Schneider to protect the people and the world from evil, believing he was the only one capable of doing so. Humbled by her bravery, Schneider agreed to help not out of duty, but out of respect for the princess's courage, recalling how she had gone all the way to the ninja fortress to save Yoko for him. Meanwhile, Abigail, facing Ni in the legendary Thunder God Sword, merged with the 3 magic weapons to take on a monstrous new form. In simple terms, he turned into a giant robot, his power now more terrifying than ever. Ni guessed that the magic Abigail was using originated from the old world, so she led him outside to use the full strength of the Thunder God Sword. The moment Abigail was within range, Ni charged forward to attack, but the power of the demon armor blocked every strike. Taking this chance, Abigail finally revealed his true intentions. The story of resurrecting the evil god to bring peace was just a lie. His real goal was to help the god of destruction reduce the entire world to nothing. At that moment, Schneider arrived with his golem and commanded it to punch Abigail directly in the face. Ironically, the face revealed behind the seemingly invincible armor turned out to be its only weak spot. Realizing that Schneider had become a good guy, Abigail played dirty, taking Ni hostage. To everyone's surprise, Schneider, a man known for his immense pride, knelt down and pleaded with Abigail for mercy. Seeing the world's most powerful mage groveling satisfied Abigail greatly. But just as he let his guard down, Schneider ordered his golem to punch Abigail's avatar, rescuing me. Now, free from the hostage situation, Schneider entered a state of intense focus, ready to unleash his full power against Abigail. Afraid of the golem's close-range power, Abigail quickly conjured a lightning bolt, destroying the golem with a single strike. With his superior gear, Abigail arrogantly demanded that Schneider surrender to him, promising to spare him and his allies. Schneider, however, refused, further enraging Abigail, who retaliated by crushing him with his massive robot. Just when everyone thought it was over, Schneider stood back up, lifting Abigail's enormous body with sheer physical strength. Facing such a fierce adversary stirred Schneider's brutal nature. He began casting an ancient forbidden spell, trapping Abigail in a shadow realm that slowly devoured him piece by piece. Suddenly, the seal within the princess's body activated, briefly freeing the evil god, which granted Abigail a surge of dark power, allowing him to break free from the spell. Schneider, caught off guard, lost his left leg and severely injured his other arm. The high priest sensed that the seal within the princess was starting to crack. Now with the upper hand, Abigail tortured Schneider mercilessly, kicking him into the wall and stomping on him like a rag doll. Confident that his biggest obstacle was defeated, Abigail turned his attention to the princess, aiming to destroy the final seal. He had deduced that the seal would be hidden in a place he couldn't easily sense within the body of the most important person in the kingdom. In this desperate moment, Schneider remembered his vow to protect the princess and forced himself up. Gathering every bit of strength, he prepared to cast his most powerful spell, the same destructive magic that once sent me and an entire castle into the air. Unfortunately, even this spell had no effect on Abigail's demon armor. Just as Abigail began to taunt them from above, Nee unleashed her own destructive spell, directing it at him. The combined force of their spells produced an energy heat surpassing even the Black Fire spell, creating an explosion powerful enough to break through the demon armor. The blast consumed everything in the area, leading the nobles and ninjas to mistakenly believe the battle was finally over. However, from within the cloud of dust, Abigail's maniacal laughter shattered their hopes. He had cast numerous anti-spell charms on himself, narrowly escaping death. Despite his bruised and battered state, Schneider struggled to stand once more. Seeing his determination, Gar and Nee joined him in the fight. Yoko stepped back, allowing them to join, as she believed that Schneider could never lose to someone like Abigail. Abigail prepared to repeat the same move that had destroyed the golem, aiming directly at Schneider. Nee wanted to rush in, but Gar stopped her, fearing she might hinder Schneider's efforts. No one truly knew how he could defeat Abigail now. Schneider rose again, casting off his broken left arm and preparing to continue the battle. From a distance, Ari and Kai arrived to support him. Yoko cheered Schneider on, promising that if he won this fight, she would accept everything he said, even giving him her first time. Hearing this, Schneider's power suddenly surged, and he unleashed his ultimate spell, transforming himself into a missile and launching directly at Abigail. He pierced through Abigail's defenses, striking at his weakest point. But the effort took its toll. Schneider's body broke in two. Light returned to the kingdom as Abigail fell. However, Schneider lay on the brink of death due to his reckless decision to push himself beyond his limits. Everyone gathered, mourning over Schneider. Yoko recalled their time together, cherishing the moments they had shared. So then, and unexpectedly, Schneider opened his eyes. He wasn't dead, but he sighed in regret, muttering about missing the chance to open Yoko's box. Infuriated, Yoko kicked him in the head. Gar, watching the scene, finally understood that Yoko was the only one who truly knew Schneider. Their joy was short-lived. Abigail stirred once more, using his tentacle armor to snatch Yoko away. Though he had lost his robot, Abigail's new form was more than enough to face the weakened Schneider. Gar and Nee appear to be holding up, but their condition is hardly better than Schneider's. Gar's right arm has a torn ligament, and he suffers internal injuries from his fight with the Lick, while Nee has exhausted her magic from casting her last destructive spell. Abigail keeps Yoko as a hostage to protect himself, knowing Schneider wouldn't make a reckless move. He fires at Schneider, knowing he won't fight back with Yoko in danger. Desperate, Yoko begs Schneider to ignore her and fight, arguing that they can't let Abigail destroy this world, even if it's not perfect. Abigail watches Yoko's plea with amusement, remarking that if this were the old Schneider, he would have attacked by now. But this new Schneider, filled with compassion and love, is different. The High Priest understands that choosing between the world and his daughter is simple for most, but not for Schneider. Caught in indecision, Schneider hesitates, giving Abigail the chance to shoot him again. The nobles chime in, saying that the fate of the world matters more than one girl's life. In the midst of this conflict, Schneider shocks everyone by boldly declaring that he will choose Yoko over the world. Abigail bursts into laughter, mocking Schneider for becoming weak and losing the legendary mage status he once had. He launches what he believes will be a final attack. But just as he strikes, a spider from Ari's charm appears to block the blow and aid Schneider. At the same time, Ari frees Niengar, while Kai makes a daring attempt to rescue Yoko. Furious that his plans are being foiled, Abigail lets out a crazed laugh. Yet he remains confident because his tentacle armor is infused with cells from the god of destruction. Tapping into the evil god's power, he creates an army of undead surrounding Schneider and his allies. As those skilled in swordsmanship charge into battle, Ari stays back to shield Schneider. They manage to fend off many of the undead, but the creatures keep regenerating thanks to the evil god's influence. Seeing the dire situation, the kingdom's soldiers and Gar's ninja force join the fray. The strategy of overwhelming the enemy with numbers seems promising until Abigail merges the undead into a single, colossal monster. Sensing an opportunity, Ni quickly casts a lightning spell to strike it down. However, the spell proves too weak, as her magical energy is nearly depleted. Abigail retaliates with a barrage of projectiles, wiping out most of the main forces. Schneider's team reaches their limits, Gar loses an arm. Ni suffers a severe leg injury, and Ari uses her spiders to shield Schneider. In a daze, Schneider finds himself in a vision where Lukai urges him to save the kingdom they both cherish. But Schneider refuses, declaring that he has always had control over his life and the world, and he won't let Abigail make a fool out of him. Schneider snaps back to reality, stirring hope among his friends. Determined to end Abigail once and for all, he charges forward, despite his broken body and drained magic. Abigail watches with amusement, relishing the struggle. Everyone urges Schneider to give up and save himself, but Yoko, who understands him better than anyone, cheers him on to keep fighting. Suddenly, fire spirits gather around Schneider, forming a temporary body of flames. With this fiery new form, Schneider manages to intimidate Abigail, who realizes that Schneider is also drawing power from the evil god. Kaizu, confused by the evil god's resonance, doesn't understand what's happening. Abigail, however, figures it out. Schneider was willing to sacrifice himself to save Ni, because he knew he would receive power from the evil god. After all, he was once the Dark Army's commander. Before Abigail can gloat further, Schneider lands a punch, cutting him off mid-sentence. Enraged, Abigail orders the giant undead creature to attack, but Schneider now effortlessly blocks its strikes. As Abigail prepares to counter, a fire demon appears to protect Schneider, allowing him to cast a devastating spell. In response, Abigail merges even more undead into the giant to absorb the blow. But Schneider isn't finished. He casts a second spell, transforming himself into a missile, piercing through the giant and incinerating Abigail's tentacles. He repeatedly strikes Abigail, pushing him to his limits. However, Abigail has one last trick. He pulls out a ring, preparing to use it to trap Schneider in another black hole. Just as he lifts the ring, Schneider hurls his flaming sword, pinning Abigail to a rock and preventing him from using his magic. With his strength finally exhausted, Schneider collapses, whispering final words to Yoko before closing his eyes. Everyone believes he's gone, but then his hand sneaks onto Yoko's behind, forcing her to swat it away. Their relief is short-lived as Abigail reappears, likely another one of his illusions. Yoko steps forward, ready to protect Schneider, when she notices the ground beneath Abigail starting to crack. Acting quickly, she pushes a boulder down, causing it to crash onto Abigail. The impact sends him plummeting, impaling him on the ceiling as he finally meets his end. The body containing the evil god's cells starts to destabilize, causing destruction to spread across the area. Gar rushes over to shield Ni and Schneider, but they all vanish in the chaos. Schneider's spirit separates and finds Yoko, and they both disappear. So the only ones left behind are Kaisu and his remaining forces. Not long after, in a remote samurai village, an unexpected visitor arrives. It's Yoko, bringing Lukai with her to seek the samurai's help. And so, the first part of the story concludes.